He thought her silence was weakness, that her calm gaze hid fear. He believed the new girl all alone would be just another easy target in his hallways. But every shove, every scornful laugh was only planting the seed of a quiet reckoning. Because sometimes humiliation is the fuel that ignites the most unexpected kind of strength, and the truth, like a precision strike, always finds its way home. The clock read 7:15 in the morning, and the buzz at Northgate High was already tangible. It was an ordinary Tuesday for most, but for Aisha, every breath in that courtyard felt like a new and unfamiliar challenge. Coming from a smaller school in a quieter part of town, where everyone knew each other, Northgate was an overwhelming universe. Crowded hallways, a cacophony of overlapping voices, and a constant hum that swallowed her whole. Her brown eyes, accustomed to the serenity of the dojo, now filtered an avalanche of unknown faces and curious glances. Aisha was a study in contrasts. The drab school uniform, grey and plain, framed a posture so straight it hinted at years of discipline. Her braided hair, meticulously styled, fell over her shoulders with an effortless grace. She wasn't outgoing, but her stillness wasn't fragility. On the contrary, it was the quiet of someone who observes, absorbs, and when necessary, prepares. The atmosphere at Northgate, with its blend of teenage euphoria and unspoken rivalries, was already starting to show its cracks. In that sea of faces, certain looks lingered, sizing her up, calculating. A subtle tension hung in the air, a preview of what was soon to surface. The early morning sun, still faint, barely cut through the shadow of anticipation that loomed over the hallways. Aisha, with her discreet presence, tried to blend in, to learn the rhythms of her new school. However, her composure stood in stark contrast to the energy of one particular trio. Leo Vance, the group's ringleader, a tall kid with a smile that could be charming one moment and menacing the next. Parker, his right-hand man, always ready with a sharp-edged joke. And Sophia Reed, Leo's confidant, whose chilling indifference was as sharp as any insult. They were hallway royalty, setting trends and holding an unofficial power over the less assertive students. Aisha wasn't looking for trouble, but her arrival, with its air of mystery and self-sufficiency, seemed to disturb their status quo. The first signs were small: an accidental bump in the hall, muffled laughter as she walked by, long stares loaded with mockery. Leo, used to getting his way, sensed a silent resistance in Aisha that he couldn't grasp. He saw an easy mark: the quiet new girl no one would stand up for. The school's invisible hierarchy was clear. They were at the top, and Aisha, the newcomer, was at the bottom. These small acts of disrespect began to pile up, setting the stage for something bigger, something that would test the limits of Aisha's patience and inner strength, something that would make it clear just who they thought they were challenging. It didn't take long for things to escalate. On a rainy afternoon, during the lunch break, the cafeteria was a chaos of voices and the smell of fried food. Aisha, tucked away at a table in the back, was trying to find refuge in a biology textbook. Leo, flanked by Parker and Sophia, spotted her. With a practiced air of superiority, he approached, and the energy from his table invaded Aisha's small space. "Look at this, a little bookworm," Leo sneered, his tone just loud enough to draw a few glances. Parker and Sophia snickered, adding to the chorus of contempt. Aisha didn't immediately look up from her book, but an almost imperceptible tension tightened her shoulders. Annoyed by her lack of reaction, Leo swatted the book, sending it sliding from her grasp and landing with a wet slap in a puddle of spilled soda. "Oops! My bad, princess," he said with a cynical smirk, making no move to help. The sound of the book hitting the floor and the silence that fell over their small area seemed to echo louder than the cafeteria's din. A few nearby students looked away. Others whispered, but no one intervened. Aisha, her eyes fixed on the now-stained textbook, felt the blow not just to the object, but to her dignity. It was a public humiliation, a cruel reminder of her place in their version of the school's hierarchy. Her jaw tightened, but not a sound escaped her lips. Only a flicker, almost invisible, ignited deep in her eyes. The soda stain on the book wasn't just a mess, it was a symbol, a reminder that in this environment, respect wasn't given, it was taken, and to Leo and his crew, Aisha didn't deserve any. In the days that followed, the subtle humiliation intensified. It wasn't direct assault, but a veiled campaign of exclusion. In class, chairs were accidentally pulled away just as she was about to sit next to someone. During group projects, her name would be conveniently left off the list, or she'd be assigned the most thankless tasks. In the hallway, laughter and whispers followed her like an invisible shadow. Aisha felt the weight of those stares, the indifference of classmates who chose not to get involved, the willful blindness of teachers who didn't seem to notice the cruel dynamic. She found herself alone, increasingly isolated, as if an invisible wall separated her from the rest of the student body. The public rejection was silent, but it pierced like 1,000 needles. No one spoke up for her, no one offered a hand. A quiet rage was building inside her chest, a controlled fury that showed itself only in the force with which she gripped her notebooks, or the resolve in her gaze as she avoided eye contact. It was a temporary ruin, a forced descent, but not once did Aisha consider crying or begging. Instead, every act of scorn rooted her more deeply in a cold determination. An observer would have felt the bubbling indignation, the empathy for a girl who stood tall, while her world seemed to be crumbling around her. There was no room for immediate revenge, only a heavy silence, charged with an unspoken promise. If this injustice makes your blood boil as much as it did mine, and you're hoping for the comeback that's simmering just beneath the surface, then like this video and subscribe. Aisha's story still holds surprises you won't want to miss. True strength is about to be revealed. Aisha didn't break. The humiliation served as a catalyst, not a conclusion. If Northgate High expected to see her wither, it underestimated the seed of discipline planted in her since childhood. Her life at the new school split into two. By day, the quiet, observant student. By night, in the solitude of her room, the athlete honing her craft. Her training, once a passion, became her refuge and her promise. While Leo and his friends boasted about their hallway victories, Aisha dedicated extra hours to her katas, the tireless repetition of movements, demanding not just physical power, but surgical precision and mental control. She didn't look for a new dojo in the city. Instead, she used the limited space of her bedroom, the opaque reflection in the window, her mirror, to perfect every strike, every block, every transition. Her breathing, once an involuntary act, became a tool for focus, a link between her body and mind. There were no shouts, no fanfare. No one at her new school knew about her past, about the black belt she had earned, tied proudly around her waist for years. That was a part of her she kept hidden, not out of shame, but from a wisdom that had taught her the value of humility and silent preparation. She didn't crave revenge. She craved justice, a moment when the truth of who she really was could finally be seen. Beyond the physical training, Aisha dove into her studies with renewed intensity. The library became her second dojo, a place where the mind was also sharpened, where knowledge was both armor and a sword. She sought to understand the nuances of her new environment, the unwritten rules, the weaknesses and strengths of those around her. Leo, Parker and Sophia continued their petty attacks, but Aisha no longer reacted. They saw the same quiet girl, perhaps a bit more withdrawn, but they couldn't see the steel being forged within, the discipline that made her immune to their shallow provocations. The change was happening, invisible to the careless eye, growing like a hardy plant in a forgotten corner, ready to bloom when least expected. The stage was being set, and the antagonist, oblivious, was walking blindly toward his own unraveling. Destiny, or perhaps just the school calendar, orchestrated the confrontation. It was the day of the school's annual talent show, an event that promised to break the monotony of the school year. The stage was set up in the gym, and the air buzzed with excitement. Aisha, encouraged by a literature teacher who had noticed her quiet brilliance, had agreed to perform a poetry recital, one of her oldest passions. She was backstage, her heart beating to a different rhythm than it did in training, a mix of nerves and a strange calm. Leo, Parker, and Sophia were in the front row, making their usual ostentatious display. They weren't there for the culture. They were there to see and be seen. When Aisha's name was announced, a murmur went through the crowd, and the three of them exchanged mocking smiles. "Well, look who decided to show up," Leo whispered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "The quiet girl thinks she's a poet now?" Aisha walked onto the stage. There was no arrogance in her stride, only a serene dignity. Her eyes scanned the audience, meeting Leo's for a brief second. There was no fear, only recognition. She didn't challenge them openly, but her presence, her upright posture, and the confidence in her voice as she recited verses about overcoming adversity were a confrontation in themselves. Each word, each delivered emotion, was a silent counterpoint to the humiliations of the past. In the middle of her performance, a small incident occurred. A plastic bottle, tossed discreetly from Leo's direction, skittered across the stage, making a sharp, distracting noise. It was a clear act of provocation. Aisha could have faltered, could have gotten angry, but to everyone's astonishment she didn't stop. Instead, with a nearly imperceptible movement, a display of precision only years of training could bestow, she used the tip of her foot to stop the bottle's roll, nudging it gently to the side of the stage without ever breaking the rhythm of her speech. The motion was so fluid, so discreet, that many didn't even notice. But Leo, Parker, and Sophia, who had orchestrated the interruption, saw it. They saw the control, the absence of panic, the quiet power in that simple gesture. The shock on their faces was undeniable, a mix of disbelief and a dawning discomfort that was beginning to look a lot like forced respect. The tables had turned, not just morally, but with visible elegance. The silence in the gym, after Aisha's performance and the bottle incident, was almost tangible. Most of the audience was applauding her poetry and the calm with which she handled the disruption. But the expressions on Leo, Parker, and Sophia were different. They were no longer looks of mockery, but of a dawning, belated understanding. Leo's smug grin had vanished, replaced by an expression of stunned silence and maybe, just maybe, a flash of shame. The girl they had underestimated, whom they had tried to isolate and humiliate, stood there, at the center of attention, radiating a strength they never could have anticipated. At the end of her recital, Aisha gave an elegant bow. Her eyes met Leo's one last time, but now there was no challenge, only a definitive calm. She didn't need to say a word, didn't need to use violence to make her point. Her mere presence, her unshakable dignity, and that one subtle movement on stage had spoken louder than any shout ever could. It was the end of a cycle of intimidation. From that day on, the accidental shoves in the hallway stopped. The mocking laughter faded, and the looks of contempt transformed into a strange mixture of caution and respect. Aisha was no longer the quiet new girl. She was the poetry girl, the one with impeccable posture, the one who defended herself without even raising her voice. That was the real final blow. Not an attack, but the revelation of an undeniable truth. It was the story's signature, etched in the silence that followed, and in the dignity of someone who no longer had anything to prove. Aisha's story at Northgate High, though marked by moments of trial, reminds us of a profound truth. Real strength doesn't always lie in the ability to strike back with aggression, but in the unshakable dignity of holding your ground. It teaches us that respect isn't demanded through fear, but earned through integrity and authenticity. Many, like Leo, Parker, and Sophia, may judge by appearances, underestimating the quiet potential every individual carries within. Aisha didn't seek revenge. She sought her own validation. Her journey is a testament to the fact that the greatest comeback happens when a person refuses to be defined by their oppression. She flourished where they tried to stifle her, proving that silent courage is one of the most powerful forms of defiance. The lesson is clear. Empathy and understanding overcome arrogance, and true authority emerges not from power over others, but from mastery over oneself. Dignity, once reclaimed, becomes an impenetrable armor. If this story of courage and resilience resonated with you the way it did with us, share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own inner strength. Leave a comment about what inspired you the most, and subscribe for more real narratives like this one, which prove that true transformation begins from within.